Ian, where do you see teams struggling the most when it comes to building AI products?
Yeah.
What's the real truth? Really struggling? Is it adoption? Is it the tools? Like what's the secret sauce? No pressure.
I think it's the mindset and how the team thinks about developing agentic systems. What we've experienced at Arthur and what a lot of our customers and partners are going through is these are the first kind of systems they're developing that are inherently non-deterministic. And us as engineers, we don't really like that. We want to write the code, we want to run it once and be sure that every time it runs after that, it's going to do the same thing. So introducing this non-determinism into the system requires a different mindset and a different operating procedure as a development team for how to produce a trustworthy, reliable system like you would traditional software. So I think that's the biggest hurdle we're seeing right now with our partners is that they don't even know how to start kind of operating in a way that can produce successful outcomes with this non-deterministic agent-based products and systems.
Great. So mindset. So basically, everybody needs a growth mindset.
Yep.
Got it. Everybody knows about that, right? Here in the room. Growth mindset, fixed mindset, growth mindset. All right. You have a demo.
Yeah.
Let's see it.
Cool. So to relate back to what I was saying before, we have kind of come up with this metaphor for how our customers and how we think about this. And we phrase this problem of, as we raised our hands before, a lot of people are experimenting with agents and trying to ship them to production, and these demos are falling flat. People aren't trusting the agents, and they're struggling to get people to buy into these agent-based products. And we refer to this as kind of crossing the chasm from this is a great prototype, a great demo, but actually producing like significant trust and value in a production-based, user-facing way. So today I'm going to show you a little bit about a new development process we've kind of created with our partners about how we've seen successful agents get developed as a new kind of development team mindset. And what we call this essentially is the agent development lifecycle, which is sort of analogous to your traditional software development lifecycle. At a high level, it's really broken down into 4 phases. The first is really before the dev team is even involved. This is more the product, the business, just aligning on what the goals are of the agent and what successful KPIs look like for this agentic system. Is it usage? Is it optimizing productivity? Is it less time your human partners need to spend doing tasks, looking into tickets, things like that? The second phase is then developing what we kind of refer to as that first part of the chasm, which is usually the part that goes well. Developing the demo, developing the prototype, developing the first framework of the agent with its tools and giving it access to the systems, and enough of a place where you can sort of vibe code it, gut check that it works, and show it off to people. The third phase then is really where the production and the trustworthiness of the agent comes into play, which is what we call our flywheel phase. And I think this is the biggest adjustment from traditional software development lifecycle. It's that agent development lifecycle is an iterative and experimental based process. It's no longer just a linear feature roadmap and things like that. You need to iterate, evaluate, and then improve the agent until it gets to the behavior standards you and your product and your team have for that agent. The last phase then is kind of the agent's working, it's trustworthy, customers are using it, it's in production, and then the continual production monitoring and making sure that just like traditional software, you're aware of issues before your customers report them to you. So I guess we'll save questions for the end. Yeah, okay, cool. So then next up, I actually have a demo about how Arthur can help you implement a process like this with your team and your business leaders and your product managers. And specifically the features I'm focusing on are the people hands-on actually building the agent. But I don't have time to cover a lot of the other ones we have as well. So to walk through an example, I'm creating we call it inventory agent. So imagine you're a seller on Shopify. You want to understand your sales and your trends, which products are hot, those kinds of things. So we have a prototype agent that does a quick, simple little workflow. It takes a user's analytical question, runs it through a text-to-SQL tool. It then executes the SQL tool, generates a graph to show you visually the answer to your question, and then responds back with kind of all this information it's collected. So I'll show off in a new tab here, kind of one sample of what this looks like. So I can ask the agent, what are my top selling products last month? And just like we saw in the previous tab, the first thing the agent's going to do is take my question, map that to a SQL query that it can use to answer the question. So we see a little bit here of selecting from a products table. It's going to sum the prices and the sales. The second step, which just went through, is then actually executing that SQL against my database. And we can see the results of that query here. So we see the product ID, the product name, and how many total were sold. And then the last step, as I mentioned before, is the data visualization step. Sorry for the formatting. Maybe I can shrink this a bit. There we go. Where it takes the SQL it generated, the data it found in the database, and then puts this together in like a nice visual chart that you can share, put in slides, things like that, and so on. And then finally summarize just with text to give you some answers to your original question. At this point, I would call this essentially the vibe-coded, I have a prototype, seems to be working pretty well, I can come up here, chat with it, show you all some examples. And now I'm going to show you how you can use some of the tools we have at Arthur to help you take this to the next level and actually start to build a robust agent and something your customers will want to buy and rely on from you. As I mentioned in this slide now, so we're in phase 2, just to kind of ground the conversation. And as part of phase 2, which is setting up kind of the foundation, the first prototype, the first thing we need to do is actually starting to instrument our agent so we can understand what it's doing. And how many people in the room have heard of, I guess, tracing, distributed tracing, open telemetry? Okay. So a very similar concept here, except for agents. And I'll show you quickly a trace here from one of my previous runs, but tracing under the hood gives us the ability to see inside sort of how the agent is thinking and processing, and as we mentioned earlier, managing that context around to produce the answer. Just to give some quick examples here, one thing I've highlighted is an example of the call out to GPT 4.1. We can see, the system prompt, the user query, the response it came back with. I can also dive in here and look at my text to SQL tool, understand how that's working. I can see the user query again, the SQL that it generated, and an explanation of why it came up with that SQL. So at a high level, this is mostly just observability and giving me the ability to troubleshoot when my vibe coding or prototype agent queries go wrong. So that's kind of the foundation that everything else is based on. The next step then is we enter the flywheel phase. So we have a foundation, we can see what the agent's doing. It's time to start optimizing and making corrections and making this production worthy. So the next step we usually think of with our partners is establishing a behavior dataset baseline. So these are essentially a log of all good examples of your agent doing the things it should be doing correctly. And we have a tool that here we go. Yeah, it should be loaded. Okay. We have a tool that lets you start collecting essentially these good examples of agent behavior. In this case, this dataset has 4 columns: a question, the right answer, the right SQL, and then what the right graph should look like. So I've collected these using my agent, saying like, this is a good example. Did you have a quick question? No, okay. Saying these are good examples, it's logged these behavior data sets. And now that I've established sort of this test case or test harness, I can actually execute these in a systematic way against my agent. So if I ever change the prompt, change a tool, optimize something within the agent, I can get a numeric answer that says, is this a step change improvement in the right direction? So let me quick hop over. I'll kick off what we call a test run, which is essentially a combination of a data set and an agent where it will run each behavior test case through your agent and then score the outputs with numeric judges. So let me quick create a test run. I'm going to call this demo. I can select my data set, and then I can select my agent endpoint. And then what I'm doing in this last step here is I'm mapping the question column from my behavior data set as the input to the agent, simulating a user asking it live. So I'll create a test run here, and what we see is this starts to update in real time, and for each of my rows in my behavior data set, we get sort of a live test case actually executing against my agent. I won't sit here and make you all watch this finish. It takes a couple minutes. But the main things to take away here are essentially we have in these purple columns the test case like gold standard examples. And then as the responses start to fill in here, we can see the agent's answers. So in this case, we have another 4 columns where we can see the generated final response, the generated SQL query, and the generated chart, which is just a giant JSON. Let me open a test I ran earlier today to show you a bit more examples of what this looks like. But at the end of one of these test runs, essentially what you have is, in the yellow columns on the far left, a numeric output for every single test case. And what this lets you do then is establish that flywheel so you can see where your agent's behavior is going bad, work on optimizing those cases, and then iterate until your agent essentially is getting 10 out of 10 on all your test cases. So that is the flywheel part. The last piece then I mentioned is phase 4, which is your agent's working 100% on your test cases. You trust it, your customers want to buy it, ship it to production. And then you need production monitoring. So the last phase of this is another part of the Arthur ecosystem, which is essentially continuous evals against production usage. And just like we saw before, we can run these evals, so tool selection, response relevance, query relevance, against all of your users' interactions with the agent and track and alert them in real time. So that way, if your agent goes off the rails, you get proactive alerts and can go debug things before your users get too upset. I want to show one quick example. This was a screenshot from a customer of ours where they were using our evals here on, I think it was August 6th, when ChatGPT 5 launched. They immediately upgraded and very quickly saw a huge performance degradation over the next 2 days. So we were able to alert with them, and they actually reverted back to GPT-4. I think there were some latency issues before it dropped again because they rewrote the agent and essentially started from scratch. But a fun example of, sometimes even new upgrades can cause issues, and there's still a lot of things to learn with agents. So I'll put this up if you want to connect, but feel free to reach out. My name's Ian, so thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. I have a question here, but I believe you gave us the answer. It's like, how do you hold the agent accountable? I'm assuming it's evals.
Yes. And I think what people are having a hard time with specifically today is knowing what evals are important. And this really comes down to sort of that phase 1, which is what are the KPIs for your agent? And this right now is varying across a lot of different agents. It's hard to generalize what good looks like because in this case it's getting the right answer to a question, but a ticket agent might be optimizing like how many tickets are completed without extra human review or things like that. So the point to take away, I guess, is to understand what good looks like and then codify that into domain specific evals, so that way when your evals are passing, that equates to an agent with good behavior.
Awesome.
Yeah.